Good afternoon. My name is David Freeze, and this is the BESA Webinar. So a year ago today, I was actually wearing this shirt in Maui, and then for some reason had to rush home via San Francisco, which was pretty scary. But I thought as an anniversary, and it being dressed down Friday, I don't know what you do in your office, but we dress down in our office. So welcome to the BESA Webinar. First off, we'd just like to congratulate a few members who've done quite extraordinary things. First off, some existing members who have passed their competence assessment standard. So I'd just like to remind you that we've actually made this more robust. It's really focusing now on can you do the job? It's much more technical. So congratulations to Commercial Maintenance Services, H Pickup Mechanical and Electrical, Jordan Environmental, Lex Hygiene, IES, Callenberg, Norton Mechanical, WMB Mechanical, and Mayville Electrical and Mechanical Engineering. Congratulations, you're doing good work. And we'd like to welcome new members, E.E. Thompson & Son, Pickow Electrical Engineering, Ferncroft Enterprises, Stewart ACR Limited, and Enviromech 1 Limited. Congratulations. So what's today about? Net zero. And we're going to start off with a poll today. Have you started your net zero journey? And we'll get the answers to that when we get to the Q&A. So if you'd like to vote now, that will be a good thing. So speakers today, we'll kick off with Mervyn Pilley, who is Executive Director of ESTA, which is the Energy Services Technology Association. Welcome, Mervyn. And I can't hear you. Are you on mute? Saving energy by being on mute.
David, yes.
And being in the dark.
I should certainly know about unmuting myself by now. And yes, I'm saving energy. I regrettably can't match the shirt. I can remember pretty much what I was doing about a year ago because I think it might have been my last trip into London. So I was probably wearing something a little bit more formal.
Well, I don't miss being on the tube in weather like this today. So Mervyn, I'm gonna hand over to you. Remind people to keep voting, and I'll come back for the Q&A at the end.
Thank you, David. Yes, hello there. Good afternoon, everybody, or good morning. Yes, good afternoon. It is good afternoon. And firstly, I'd like to say how a marvellous honour it is being here and having watched a huge number of the BESA webinars from pretty much from day one from last year. It's really interesting and important to be on the other side of the camera. And it's also quite good to see a lot of people on the webinar. Always an important aspect of what BESA do. And yes, looking forward to being presenting through. So yes, and also good to start the day off really, or start the webinar off. I think net zero is becoming quite a buzz phrase. It's becoming an important issue for a lot of people, a lot of organisations, for government, for governments, for all sorts of different organisations. And really today, what I wanted to focus on was really the aspect that my trade association actually does. So as David would have introduced me, I'm the Executive Director of the Energy Services and Technology Association, ESTA for short. We're basically trying to get on to the next slide. Hang on a second. Yes, we're a long-standing trade association, about 35 years old, working to provide energy efficiency solutions effectively for commercial and non-domestic organisations. Obviously, energy efficiency and net carbon zero has an impact on individuals as well, certainly for residential, people's homes, as has been recently highlighted by the Green Home Grant Scheme. But ESTA's work is all about really the commercial and the non-domestic organisations. And in actual fact, we're quite a little bit frustrated at the moment in terms of the government focus and the work that the government's putting in terms of the commercial and the non-domestic side. I think it's true to say that we're focusing on, from our perspective, what we believe is a very fundamental solution to actually starting the journey, which effectively is using less energy or also using what energy you do use as efficiently and effectively as possible. It's a lower cost and faster payback solution or start to that journey because so many of the other solutions that are being put forward are clearly much higher cost, potentially carbon capture storage, EVs, tree planting, renewables themselves. A lot of those solutions are much more expensive and obviously have a much slower, longer payback than energy efficiency does. ESTA's got 4 main groups, and I'm highlighting them because we do try and provide a solution for all the parts of the sector, the different solutions that are out there, options that are available, based around energy efficiency and carbon reduction to help ESTA's members, clients, start the journey, progress the journey, and achieve that net zero target. We've got the Independent Energy Consultants Group, which at the moment are basically offering ISO 50001, ESOS reporting, and SECR auditing and reporting. Energy Service Contracting Group is the energy performance contracting side, companies that offer to help clients save energy in return for a contract. Automated Measuring and Targeting Group, which is our meter manufacture and installation group, and our Smart Buildings Group, which is all built around building energy management systems, building management systems, sensors, and advancing technology. And interestingly enough, last year we actually launched the ENCO, the Energy Conscious Organisation Behaviour Change Programme, and we have a strong view in ESTA is that actually much of what we do is the energy efficiency side is 50% behaviour change and 50% technology. And I would actually just stress that's not necessarily just turning off a light bulb, shutting a window. It's actually making best use of the technological solution, making sure that you program the technology correctly, and you also know how to interpret what you get out of it. Very pleased to be working with BESA in this area. Late last year, we created a joint special interest group looking specifically at energy efficiency in buildings, and that group's already met twice and is hopefully going to produce some very helpful feedback to members of both BESA and ESTA how that energy efficiency can be maximized. A quick review of what is net zero, and I know, as I've already said, it's become a bit of a buzz phrase, and I know that there are some interpretations about what it actually is. It means different things to different people. The net aspect is quite an important aspect, remembering that it's basically a balance between what you put in and what you take out effectively in terms of emissions. Obviously, the UK set a legally binding target in 2019, which has created a bit of a rod for its own back. There's been quite a bit of debate about how the government's planning to actually meet the target, whether it will meet the target based on the policies that it's put into place up to now. Clearly, COP26, which is happening in November in Glasgow, is accelerating that policy urgency. And indeed, there's been obviously a document, the Industrial Decarbonisation Strategies, just come out this week on Wednesday, which does actually have some aspects of how they plan to bring energy efficiency into the decarbonisation of industry, bigger industrial properties. I think it's important to balance, or we think it's important to balance carrots and sticks in terms of policy. And by that, really, I think we feel that incentivisation from government to help organisations and companies through that net zero process, tax reliefs where possible, incentivisations, VAT, perhaps reductions for energy efficiency equipment and so on. There's obviously also the carrots, the future building standard in terms of making sure, the carrots are the tax reliefs, the sticks are the policy aspects like the net zero standard, future building standard, where you have to do things to comply and do efficiency that way. In reality, net zero should be a relatively simple concept as a concept, but clearly from an organisational point of view, there would be a very wide range of approaches how to achieve net zero and solutions available depending on the size of your, the structure of your business and what you actually do. I think we would all say that very important part of getting to start the journey, if you haven't already started, and obviously be interested to see the poll results later on, is a strategic plan with realistic timelines needed initially. I think there's also critically important to say is that what's I think have gone are the days of greenwashing, by which I mean using your PR department to put out that you're doing all these wonderful things. There's a growing reputational issue out there now. I think Mark Carney has been driving that carbon zero is important from a business perspective as well as from a saving the planet perspective. Very brief scope in terms of what the greenhouse gas protocol says about the emissions and what areas you can directly control and the areas you can't control or you have less control over. I'm not going to particularly read through that slide, but mainly ESTA's solutions have come in terms of scope 1 and scope 2, but scope 3 is important. So making sure that your own supply chain and all the organizations you have in your supply chain are also part of the journey, making sure that they're taken on the journey with you. Offsetting has come into the discussion recently. It's become quite an issue for some. There are some out there who say that offsetting is not a valid approach. You really do have to do all the work yourself in your own organization. But a reality check, it might be an option for SME businesses, because the SME business won't have that ability and the in-house resource to be able to implement all the strategic issues that would achieve net zero. The quality and transparency of the offsetting schemes is under debate. There have been many schemes in the past, and there's been that discussion about whether they're valid and whether there's the transparency there. Planting trees in Africa might sound a very good thing to do, but how much transparency is that plan actually happening, and the results from that. But on the other hand, the argument I've heard is that doing something is better than doing nothing. And that's really the critical thing I wanted to say and finish off today, is that energy efficiency has tended to be not ignored, but we're very keen in ESTA to really drive that organisational process through with government. We really think that energy efficiency should be top of the agenda. We are planning to present effectively a manifesto at COP, where it will be very much based around how every organisation, every business should be focusing on using less energy and effectively trying to use that energy efficiency, the energy they are using, as effectively as possible, to try and really get the carbon reduction down through your own organisation. Contact details on the slide there, and looking forward to taking part in the panel, and yeah, looking forward to the next stage. And now I'm going to hand over to Conor. Sorry, Conor, apologies. I should have realised I need to hand over to you.
That's not a problem. Thank you very much, Mervyn. And yeah, I think you've managed to a great lead in, because saves me covering the details of scope 1, 2, and 3. I thought I'd just introduce myself. So I'm Conor Storkey. I'm head of sustainability for construction at MACE. So MACE Group, just in case anyone hasn't heard of us, we do our own developments. We're a main contractor, we're a consultant, and we operate buildings as well. I personally have had a bigger focus on the construction, so my presentation's probably going to be slightly biased towards construction, and as a main contractor. But I guess it's worth phrasing that the really technical questions that I can imagine are going to come through at the end, I'll pass those over to Mervyn and give you some insight into what we're doing. I thought it was the opportunity to speak today and share. It's a perfect time for us as a business. We have done a lot of work, and I'll talk you through our own strategy. Hopefully there's some useful tips and points for yourselves if you're either starting this journey or already along the journey. Very keen to collaborate as much as we can and try and be as transparent, and I will touch as similar onto different scopes as well, but it's a challenge to say the least. So Steps About Footprints is our campaign that we launched about 18 months ago, and it was a commitment to become a net zero carbon business, and I'll talk you through how we got there. So we were in a fortunate position as a business. We had been tracking our carbon emissions, our own footprint for quite some time. I think I joined MACE about 6 years ago, and we already had some pretty good data being collected from all of our energy, so all of our offices, all of our site emissions. So we weren't starting from scratch, and we already had some reduction targets in place. But our CEO and our board of directors realised, good sort of 2 years, 18 months ago, that there was a climate emergency, and that we had to sort of really kind of increase the momentum that we were sort of slowly forming. And our CEO wanted to move quick, similar to what Mervyn said there. We took the stance of it's better to do something now with a clear plan in place. So we made the commitment to be a net zero carbon business by the end of 2020. And so there was an element of offset involved, but you can see there's some numbers here, but in 2019 we were around 24,000 tons of carbon, and you can see I'll talk through each one of these sort of areas where we did a lot of mapping exercise and looked at where our footprint was. So again, that is all of our scope 1 and 2, and then we started to consider our scope 3. Obviously we didn't have all of our scope 3 emissions in there because our supply chain is huge, but I'll come on to what we're working on and how we influence that. And then offsets, exactly, it is a controversial point, offsets, and yeah, we felt that we've got a 10% year-on-year reduction as a business to actually get our emissions to 0. But again, that urgency and having a climate emergency in place, we felt partnering with gold standard certified projects was the right decision, was the right solution for MACE. So in 2020, end of last year, we did offset our residual emissions. Partly because of COVID and the pandemic, we saw massive reductions in our emissions last year. I like to think a big chunk of the reduction was due to the work myself and the team that we've got in MACE had been doing. But yeah, we reduced our emissions down to about 13,000 tons, and I'll come on to some how we done that. So about 2015, MACE had signed up and pledged to be a member of RE100. RE100 is run by the Climate Group, and it's a commitment by big corporations that they're going to buy 100% of their power from renewable energy. And it's been great, a lot of collaboration, lots of opportunities to speak to different companies and where they're at on their journey to net zero carbon. And it also gives a lot of reassurance to the industry that companies want this and are going to make commitments to buy renewable power. So we consolidated our power supplies across all of our projects, all of our offices globally, and set up partnerships with renewable energy suppliers. We're at 71% currently, and the majority of the emissions to get to 100% is actually diesel generators on site. So hopefully some of you might have seen in the Construction Inquirer and other magazines this week, MACE have partnered with a company called AFC who produce hydrogen generators. It's very early days, but we're excited to set that partnership. We've also been in a lot of innovation around battery storage on sites and trying to remove those diesel generators. Also working a lot with our supply chain on actually removing plant and machinery and actually just removing diesel from sites. Not just from a carbon perspective, but it's the air quality issues. Most of our projects are London-based, and air quality is a big issue for us. I'll come on a bit later on about the supply chain engagement, but a big part of what we're doing is how we work with our supply chain to help them set their targets and help bring them on the same journey that we're on. Embodied carbon, this is a big one, and in all honesty, this is something that we've had to really kind of focus on over the last 12-18 months. We probably hadn't been considering how much of an impact the embodied carbon was and how much influence we had as a business. All of our projects now, we map and calculate the embodied carbon for all of our construction projects. So we've decided to use the one-click software, but there's plenty of there's some really good calculation tools available now. And then we're setting up partnerships with different solutions. We have an internal business unit in MACE called MACE Tech, and they're leading the way with some really innovative low carbon cassettes that are using cement-free products. And the steel industry, so steel industry produce about 8% of the global emissions. So as you can imagine, steel is something we're really focusing on. We use a lot of it, and we don't see. We can see that we're going to keep building steel frame buildings. So we partnered again with the Climate Group to help launch the Steel Zero campaign. And again, it's this sort of commitment to the industry that we're going to be procuring net zero carbon steel by 2040. We've got an interim target of 2026 to have ultra low emissions steel, which is quite exciting. All I would say on this piece is that MEP is the next big focus for MACE and the embodied carbon of the services. So we've reviewed and been sort of going through the CIBSE's TM65, which is the methodology of how to calculate embodied carbon in building services. And my colleague Paul McSorley is probably listening today. He's doing some great work trying to also feed into CIBSE and how MACE could play a part in collecting better data. I think, in all honesty, the data on building services and the embodied carbon is a long way off where it should be, and obviously we're starting to see some good progress in the other materials in buildings, and hopefully we'll see the same in services as well. Travel, something that we've clearly seen a massive reduction over the last 12 months. Not many people flying and traveling where they can. But our biggest point is now to maintain that where we can. And MACE, I'm sure everyone on the call has invested heavily in more digital technologies to keep working. And it's going to be a big incentive. It's going to be a big push for MACE to maintain that where we can. There's been some great innovations come through. You can see the picture there of the RealWear hardware. A lot of our prefab MEP units now, the inspections and test plans that we're doing, we're using virtual headsets so that just one person goes out rather than sending a team of 5 or 10 different consultants and client teams, and we virtually do those inspections. So seeing some really big savings by doing that. And then finally, we added in to our offset the emissions from our employees working from home. So we did quite a lot of calculations to sort of estimate how much of an increase people working from home rather than going into the office has caused. And we're going to be running a series of a kind of a program of incentives to try to get our MACE people to reduce their carbon emissions at home where they're working from home. Finally, just to touch on waste and water, we include in our emission calculations the emissions from waste and water. As an industry, still a massive issue, waste, and we sort of got a lot more work to be done, but we've got a team of some really keen people in MACE that are really delving into the sort of cost of waste as a business and trying to find more incentives and how we can really build in more circular economy principles. So if anyone on the call has good ideas, feel free to share them after me. But yeah, looking at actually the end of life of buildings as well, and how we can actually design for disassembly is I think where the industry is moving to. And so I think, yeah, there's a couple of exciting innovations coming through, but hopefully we'll see a lot more this year on the circular economy innovations. Then this is where it's getting really exciting. This report that I can share a link. Actually, we launched a report about 2 weeks ago to kind of promote what I've just talked through on where we're up to in the last 12 months. But I think looking forward is where the biggest opportunities are. We've just relaunched MACE's own corporate strategy, and number one, we've got three pillars of our strategy, and number one is to pursue a sustainable world. So as a sustainability professional, it's quite exciting to really get the sort of number one spot, and the engagement from MACE people has been quite phenomenal, and like kind of our websites and everything are getting the most hits on sustainability, which is great, and we're also getting the most applicants for sustainability roles across the whole business, which is always nice, a bit of friendly competition. But we have set ourselves a 10% year-on-year carbon reduction. This is we have been doing a lot of reviews of science-based targets, and this 10% year-on-year reduction is closely aligned. It's actually better than what we think a science-based target would be, but it's easier to communicate and don't lose people. Sometimes when you talk of science-based targets, it might go over some people's heads. And then I'll come on to it, but we want to also try and help our clients save over 1 million tonnes of carbon. So bearing in mind MACE's footprint is around 13,000 tonnes, we're trying to target that 1 million tonnes, and we have that opportunity through our consultancy part of the business, through our construct parts, for our operational area, and that's really challenging. So every bid that comes into MACE now, we do a full review of the building's design, the operational energy use, and the embodied carbon, and we're really challenging them. Even if a client doesn't want a net zero carbon solution, we're going to offer it to them regardless. Yeah, we'll give them a compliant bid, but we'll also say that we found a number of innovations and opportunities to reduce the carbon emissions in operation and in embodied carbon. So that's something we're going to track, and we've set ourselves, like I say, that target of 1 million tonnes, and that's where we feel we could actually have the bigger impact. So just to summarise, really, our original strategy over a year ago has evolved quite a long way. It was very much focused on scope 1 and 2 and what MACE had direct control over, and now we're shifting to, we think we're in a good place on our own emissions. We really need to focus on our wider influence around the buildings that we design and build, and the materials that we procure, and our supply chain. So there's a lot of exciting work that we're doing with our supply chain as well. I think that's my last slide, so just waiting for David to pop back up and
there we are.
Start the questions. Hello.
Thank you, Conor. Could I ask the other panelists to rejoin us, please? Firstly, Mervyn Pilley from ESTA, and welcome to Ian Fisher from Airmaster AC. Welcome, Ian.
Hi there. Hi, everybody. Good to see you all. I enjoyed both them presentations. I thought they were brilliant.
Good. Congratulations are in order, I understand, Ian. You've just been made a fellow of the Institute of Refrigeration.
Yeah, I have, yeah. That is quite an achievement as well, because I weren't expecting that, and that's not what I planned 4 years ago, but I think it's just the willingness to get involved. I've done a lot of STEM ambassador work. I've wrote quite a few technical papers and things like that. And yeah, I got invited to be a fellow. It was just a great honor. I'm over the moon.
Good. Glad to hear it. Well done. So we're going to reopen the poll now, because we didn't get everybody through on the first lot. I think about 77%. So if you haven't voted, here's going to be your chance to vote. And I'm going to kick off with a question which I'm going to ask all of you, but I'm going to start with Mervyn. And that is, how can SME businesses engage with net zero? Isn't this just for large organizations like MACE? Mervyn?
No, definitely not, David. I've worked for many years with SMEs. It's certainly most of the organizations I either run or owned or run trade associations for have been SME driven. SMEs have a critical part to play. Obviously, in fact, for MACE as a main contractor would also, I think a lot of the supply chain would be SME driven. So getting SMEs involved in this process is critically important. And in fact, to be fair, there are quite some decent solutions that have started to come through into the market for SMEs specifically. Some platforms out there, some organizations have set up very SME friendly ways of measuring. It's obviously a little bit harder to measure a baseline. Conor mentioned the fact that MACE had started off with quite a lot of information about what their baseline was, what their carbon baseline was, but obviously that's much harder potentially for an SME. I mean, to be fair, SMEs, obviously the very term, there's a very wide range. As I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation, the solutions really are focused a lot around what you do as a business in terms of transport, you know, your buildings, what operation, what are you actually using in your SME business. Yes, SMEs can certainly have a route. I'm a great believer in standards like 50001. They should be available to SMEs. That's an energy management standard, knowing how to manage your energy and make the best use of it. The behavior change that I mentioned actually is quite important, I think, as well. Behavior change is not expensive. It's really about engaging, making sure your staff, if you don't have the luxury of an energy manager, if you're a very small SME, you know, if you don't have a dedicated facilities manager, then it's having the ability to get the staff understanding what they're doing, why they're doing it, how they can best make use of the resource. Yeah, absolutely, SMEs must be involved. The government actually has spent a lot of effort and time on SME energy efficiency as well, you know, focusing the fact that SMEs as a group do use a substantial amount of the energy in the UK. So it's obviously important that they're very much included in solutions.
Ian, what's your view on SMEs?
Yeah, well, same again. It's an harder journey for SMEs than it is for the larger corporations, and I think it all starts with actually legislation compliance, encouraging their clients for legislation compliance with things such as like F-gas to reduce refrigerant leakage, taking on TM44s, looking at energy efficient the buildings, and really helping their clients. And then also if they can go on that journey themselves and embrace it. So I'm a big fan of legislation and accreditation. So if you get things like 9001 and 14001 and things like that, and try and embrace more things. I know you mentioned zero steel. I've not heard of that one, Conor, so I'm actually going to be having a look at that later. But there's all other things to embrace, like zero water, zero waste, circular economy. I mean, for some manufacturers that we buy, they already embrace circular economy. So they're wanting their old equipment back so they can recycle the metal and the electronics and also the refrigerant inside. So as an SME, you know, try and get your own building up to scratch, but also just engage in all these other pathways as well.
I mean, can I just quickly add, David, on that point about the SME side, the building side? Do need to remember, of course, a lot of SMEs are in buildings that they don't own. So if they're renting, it's obviously harder because it's the landlord that needs to be able to really implement some of the building side of energy efficiency. But no,
So Conor, as the big company here, how are MACE engaging with your supply chain then, and have you set them any targets?
Yeah, no, thanks. Yeah, I think just also on the SME point, it's probably still a massive opportunity as well, because I find it's a great way to sort of start that conversation with your clients. And you're sometimes trying to sort of find opportunities. It's hard to just go in and cold call, but talking about sustainability and net zero carbon is great. For us, we're fortunate. We have a MACE Business School, and we have a sort of supply chain team, and they've been what we've seen the last year is not just sustainability managers in MACE taking ownership of this as a strategy, and they've been really kind of key to engaging with our supply chain, and part of our strategy moving forward, we've kind of set the challenge to our supply chain for everyone to have a net zero carbon strategy. We're not saying that they all need to be net zero carbon today, but I just think that kind of thought process of sort of putting pen to paper and actually kind of starting to track your emissions and have a route to net zero carbon, I think that's the first point. And we don't want to be the kind of scary main contractor whacking everyone over the head saying do it, but I think we've already seen a huge engagement. We did a few polls with our supply chain, and we've gone from sort of, I think it was less than 10% of our supply chain had a strategy to up to 40% in less than 6 months. So that engagement and just asking those questions has been good. And we've run a series of workshops with them as well, just to sort of similar to what I talked through today, but talk about our approach and then see and link them together to talk amongst themselves, which has been really good. And then the final point, which a few have come back to us, and clearly not everyone can afford sustainability managers and sort of those resources. So we do have a consultancy part of the business, and we are now working with some of them to sort of create those strategies and help map their emissions. So yeah, a little plug for us. If anyone is interested, feel free to reach out.
So are we saying, and I'll start again with you, Conor, and then work my way back around. You mention of behaviours. Is it about mindset? You have to have the mindset to do this, and I'm taking it that for you as MACE, if you've got the mindset, you've got the behaviour change, then you will help out the supply chain. Is that how I've read this?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I can talk internally. Like internally in MACE, I've seen a shift, and it's massively because of the sort of the school strike campaigns that have been happening, and even Extinction Rebellion has kind of brought the attention to everyone. So we were definitely pushing on an open door with MACE people when we sort of launched this, but we've also recently been running a sort of a program, if you like, to our top senior managers, and it does need to filter down from the top. I think the bottom-up approach is extremely challenging. So if there's sort of leaders on the call here listening today, I think it does really need to come from you and really buy into it. And obviously there's a massive corporate the business benefits for that. Our biggest strategic clients are really putting this on up on the #1 agenda now. So you really don't have the luxury of not believing in climate change and not believing in this. You will be left behind.
No, and that's a good point. You said, are there leaders on the call today? So we couldn't reopen the poll. My apologies, but we got 77% of you anyway. 65% have already started the net zero journey. 35% haven't. So you know, I would say from that the majority of people are, you know, already bought into it because they're already on it, and I guess the 35% are probably going to start fairly shortly. What do you do, Ian, when you because all customers, all clients start off when you start scoping out a project, they want a building that's going to win the Sterling prize, and they want all those nice things. Yeah, I want ground source, I want that, I want to be proud of this building for my kids and all of that. And then the price comes in and they look at it and they go, well, yeah, I can't afford that. So actually, let's get rid of that. And then at the very end, how do I justify what I've done and get it back? How do we overcome that with clients who want the earth but can't afford it?
I think that's going to be legislation driven. I mean, Conor touched on a lot of things. That as an SME, we are driven. You know, we're tier 2, tier 3 suppliers, and we are driven by the tier 1 suppliers. And in order for SMEs to spend their money and engage in being more sustainable, they want to see some reward for it, and that might be better points or better preference on winning projects. So it's not just purely on price. When it comes to the buildings that are coming out, we basically price what our customers want us to do, and we do see you know, a strong increase in LEED, BREEAM, SCOR and well building and those kinds of schemes. And I think though something like that needs to be mandatory in legislation in order to drive all buildings to go that way, because like you said, they all start off wanting the maximum, and then all of a sudden they get value engineered down to a point where they've got some kind of sustainability, although minimal, and they're happy with price as well. But from an SME point of view, we are driven by our tier 1.
And just on that, Ian, do you think, would you ever feel empowered enough to offer two solutions, one that is kind of more efficient and sustainable, but maybe with an increased cost? Because we're trying to do that to our clients, and I think I'd massively embrace that if we had asked our supply chain to price something and they came forward with a even more efficient solution we probably weren't aware of. That would go down extremely well, I think.
It does, but it's just the time and effort in doing it, because we're already at a point where most companies are inundated with tenders, and it's tough enough getting one out without doing various options. Then one option leads to another option. From our point of view, we just want a clear path to price. So we would look at somebody like you, Conor, at MACE to get that specification for us to price.
I think this is probably giving a lot of intel away here, but we're definitely seeing a shift with our biggest clients about bringing MACE in at an earlier stage from that kind of earlier construction advisor, and the benefit from that, and I've had it directly from our sort of CEO, that we then have the opportunity to bring our supply chain in earlier, and then we're trying to really sell the benefits to the clients that say that we really do have the opportunity to go through different scenarios and optioneering when we're involved. When we're getting appointed as the main contractor at stage 4 design, it's just so limited to actually how much value we can add.
Yeah, I guess it's as much a lot of that design time has gone as well, and you're already on site, and then it's much driven to steer yourself out. So Mervyn, would you have any advice for quantity surveyors on how they can support the net zero plans within an organisation, and how they can therefore impact the results?
I think for quantity surveyors uniquely, only as part of a professional supply chain, really, though. I mean, the consultant side, I mean, obviously I mentioned our consultant members are very focused in looking to give advice to as wide a range of businesses as possible. I think the problem with pricing, I mean, obviously Ian and Conor both mentioned pricing there in terms of getting the right project at the right price. I think construction in particular has been always certainly focused a lot, and I've got a bit of a construction background as well in the past life. So much been focused on price and putting those bids in, putting those tenders in. It's always been so focused on price, it's been almost impossible to build in a lot of extra gap in the pricing to cover off those compliance costs. I think, Ian, you talked about regulations and things being mandatory. I mean, my only slight concern is if you make things mandatory, whilst, I mean, the government likes free market, so generally most of the plans it puts into place is around the businesses sorting things out for themselves. They don't tend to put things through policy, although the Future Home Standard, obviously that is regulation and what you're going to put in a building. That hasn't probably answered the question specifically, David, in terms of quantity surveyors. my days of dealing with quantity surveyors in the construction sector go back a long way, but I'm just trying to work out how that would impact directly on carbon.
Okay, well, I still bear the scars, but I'm going to pass that over to Connor.
Is that
Connor's
right?
put his
Sorry.
hand up. He's got a
Yeah,
better
no,
answer probably.
no, it's not that. I just had some recent sort of, I'd say, successes of this, and this is, I think the commercial managers, quantity surveyors, and estimators are going to be like the key to genuinely changing this. And two things. One thing, when we talk about carbon, you couldn't get any closer to what they do as a day job with cost. When we are assessing buildings and carbon, it's like, you know, a quantity surveyor would make a great sustainability carbon manager, because it's, you know, you're switching pounds for tons of carbon. But one thing we had, it was actually a really engaged client. I'm sure I can say the name, Landsec. Really set out from a tender process that sustainability was key to them. And what we did on this tender is, when we usually do a big value engineering exercise, and, you know, just quite often stripping things out to show our prices, we actually had a column that clearly defined what the carbon impact would be for that. And that's something we're now embedded in all our tenders. So if you do say, you know, get rid of that ground source heat pump, you'll save yourself X amount of money, but you'll have a negative impact on the carbon of Y. And if you put them in the same, we always used to do that, but they would be in two different documents or two different parts of the tender submission. But when you see those columns next to each other, it does make the person reviewing that have to think twice around, can I really sacrifice that much carbon for that saving?
Can I ask a quick question there, Conor? Are you finding that the skill sets of QSs are up to speed with sustainability and carbon? I mean, certainly most of the QSs I used to know, and we're going back quite a long time now, but they were very traditional QSs. They wouldn't necessarily have had, I'm not sure what RICS, for example, are doing in terms of training up QSs, but are you finding the QSs you use pretty switched on?
Yeah. My brain's thinking of all the different people that I've engaged with, and yeah, it's a mixed. It is a mixed. It's always going to be a mix, but I don't know if I'm seeing it slightly from a MACE, within the MACE bubble, if you like, but it is such a big priority that even in our cost consultancy and commercial side, they're all getting up to speed and training on it, and then in construction they're all training. So, but I might be a little bit biased.
I think it's the collaboration of the professionals I was trying to refer to in there, the design, the QS. It's that supply chain, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I think you'll only show where there's good case studies that kind of show that collaboration and early engagement, the results come through. And if you can deliver, we've managed to deliver projects, you know, within budget, within program, and some of the most sustainable buildings, then the more of those that come through, the easier it's going to get, I think.
A lot of it's driven by clients, of course, and by the funders of the clients. Are you, now that the big four accountancy firms have come up with a common standard for environmental, social and governance issues for accounting for that, are you seeing that becoming an increasing influence, Conor? And then I'm going to ask Ian and Mervyn about it.
Yeah, no, it's a good time. We've just been doing a load of sessions, and we've been bringing in some big clients that have sort of shared what they're doing. And yeah, I think it's the availability of funds and better financing, which is going to see. I think it's slowly getting there, and I think the kind of leading clients have twigged that there's a big pot of money available if they can show that they're meeting those ESG commitments. So yeah, I think it's going to be definitely driven by better rates and more available sort of funds through green bonds. So yeah, it's definitely increasing. I think it's going to grow traction.
Sure. And Ian, are you seeing that?
Yeah, we're seeing an increased trend in our smaller customers, and they're being driven mostly by ISO 14001, so they want to get all their carbon tracking down for the refrigerants and things like that. And then when you look at our larger clients, a lot of them are looking to get their carbon down. They've been given targets. You know, you've got to reduce your carbon emissions by 30%. You've got to get buildings off gas. So we're getting a lot of inquiries, and where they're wanting to do calculations on what kind of carbon emissions a building will have now versus if it's upgraded to things like heat pumps. So there's a lot of requests for it, but not a lot of projects in it that have gone over the line. We're finding a lot of people are just curious at a minute, which is all right, but again, all these things take up a lot of time to calculate. They're not 2-minute calculations, but yeah, there's definitely an uplift in awareness and inquiries for it.
And Mervyn, are you noticing that at ESTA?
Well, the accountant in me, David, is you probably my long-term background is an accountant, so I've got an active interest in reporting and what people are supposed to be putting into their financial reports every year, about annual reports about what they're doing in the space. Couple of points. One on that particular aspect is that I think a lot of the challenges, certainly for ESTA members, has been, for example, the ESOS regime in terms of the Energy Savings Opportunity Scheme reporting. A lot of people are finding things that are needed and within organisations, but the trouble with that is it's mandatory for big companies, large companies. The downside is that actually what hasn't been mandatory is actually having to implement the solutions that are found at an audit stage. So there's a bit of a disjoint between looking and seeing what's needed in an organisation. In terms of finance and funding, I'm not going to lie, I mean, certainly the Green Homes Grant Scheme that's obviously been very much in the news recently and in reality has not worked, or certainly doesn't seem to have achieved anything like what the government was hoping it was going to achieve, has illustrated that someone's got to pay for all these measures. Expecting the public, the individual house owner to pay 2/3 of the cost of insulating their home was a big ask. And I think what is important, and this is an aspect of education, so the public and businesses and organisations need to be educated about the need for this, and certainly companies like MACE can drive that education through their supply chain, through their clients, which is obviously another important part of that. But paying for the structure, yeah, the worrying thing for me, as I said, the Green Homes Grant Scheme, a lot of SME businesses, installer businesses involved in that scheme. There's been a major issue about getting paid for the work. Businesses have had to spend money training staff, training installers. That's not going to potentially pay back for those businesses. So I think the government, they've always said they're expecting to put in 9 billion and they want the other 30 billion or whatever the cost is going to be. Reality, I mean, the cost of decarbonisation and achieving targets is so big that someone's got to pay, and funding and finance being available for that. The public sector is getting quite a reasonable amount of money at the moment. Public sector decarbonisation fund, although that's been heavily oversubscribed. So it's that balance about where's that resource coming from. Certainly the SMEs accessing finance, for example, for energy efficiency, CapEx is a struggle. You know, it's not the easiest market, and of course in the pandemic, access to finance was never going to be particularly easy anyway, other than bounce back and civils.
Yeah, I think there's still a lot on what you touched on in your presentation as well, Mervyn, which were energy efficiency as well. Because I think a lot of problem with a lot of buildings is nobody really knows what good looks like. You've had a building and you've been running it for 20 years and it's always cost you 10 grand a month to run. But in actual fact, that's really bad, and it should always be costing you five grand. So I think it's not all about new stuff, it's about getting the best energy efficiency out of existing stuff. And I think it all starts with monitoring. If people start monitoring what they've got and recording what they're in, then there's some kind of central database where people can share what their buildings are cost to run, and you can look at similar buildings and see what theirs are costing to run. And I think that's a big thing that people are missing in it, because it's all about all the new things, and I think we do need to be looking at run costs of existing stuff.
Well, thank you, Vane, because that allows me to segue quite nicely into the operation of the buildings, because that's where a huge amount of carbon and energy usage is. So should facilities managers be taking greater interest in the journey when it comes to the ongoing repair maintenance once a structure is handed over, and getting their supply chain on board, especially when many of those supply chains are SMEs? So I guess first off, early involvement of the facilities maintenance companies, and then secondly, how do they get their supply chains involved?
Yeah, I reckon so. I'm a big believer in seasonal commissioning, and that's something that doesn't happen. I know that can happen as part of BREEAM, but what you tend to find is that that's only kept during defects, you know, of the new build, and then as soon as it's handed over to a maintenance provider, it kind of falls aside because it costs that bit of extra money to do that. Because it's all about getting the cheapest price to maintain that building. So yeah, I think building owners, as part of a package, they should have some information about how much that building is expected to cost to run, and if it starts waving off it, they can start looking at maintenance and operation to see if that's gone off track as well.
And Conor, you operate buildings as well. How do you deal with this process?
I mean, I guess from the construction point of view, we've had some, again, lots of university buildings stuff where we've followed the sort of BESA soft landings approach. And I mean, it's been successful, but I would say it was mixed. And that does depend on, who's the EFM management coming on and how engaged they want to be. It was quite an interesting, I was involved in one project myself and bringing them in some of the design meetings to ask their challenges on the buildings that they're already, especially on a wider estate. And you always hear they always moan about the main contractor and the team did the install and why it doesn't work. And then when you actually open the door and say, "Oh, great, yeah, come and tell us what doesn't work," then and we'll fix it first time. They're like, they didn't have anything to moan about. It was almost like, here's your opportunity to pull it apart during the design phase, and we didn't have as much input as we'd hoped. So, but I think that has to happen more often. You need to be almost appointing the FM managers whilst you're still in the design phase, if possible, and actually bring them into that process, because there's nothing worse than just a cold handover, a main contractor just passing it over and not having their input.
I guess you also see that through the employer's information requirements that are so often cut and pasted, that shows that actually nobody's really thought about how they're going to use the building until they get in there, and then they know exactly how they didn't want to operate it.
Yeah.
It's how they told you they did want to operate it. But that's I'm going to change topic again, just quickly. So one for Conor, carbon offsetting. That's cheating, isn't it? Cheating. You talked about a gold standard offsetting program. So what is there one that's a recognised accreditation for offsetting programs?
Yeah. But I mean, we made the decision when we launched our strategy that if we went down the offset route, they would need to be gold standard certified. And it's always an interesting debate, and I think the thing it comes back to is how much of a emergency is it? And I think we kind of went with the thing, well, genuinely you think it's an emergency enough to need to do something today, but we realise that that's not going to be a long-term approach. We don't want to be. We'll maintain those partnerships and keep those going, but we need to show the reductions year on year, which is our main focus. It's the final piece of the puzzle. Really was the offsets. And some feedback, like to get gold standard certified projects, they're mostly in more developing countries, and I think that comes back to really where they're also the countries that are going to be hit the hardest because of climate change. So that's not necessarily a bad thing, but we are also trying to get projects set up and run in the UK where MACE people can actually engage. We can actually bring our supply chain on that, and you never know, we'll hopefully maybe see a MACE forest one day that we can really show for it. But yeah.
Good. Well, we're nearly there. So the last couple of questions. So this is getting really down into you're an SME, a micro business, in fact. So specific example: small company, 6 employees, all working from home but traveling extensively to client sites. How can we plan to reduce our carbon usage, given their limited resources and expertise in the field, and their clients are willing to help them? So how can they reduce it? How would you start them, Conor? And then I'll ask Ian and Mervyn.
Yeah, I mean, like I said at the start, it's worth just quantifying what it is first of all, so you have a bit of an idea on how much you can save if you know the details of the transport they're using and the activities they're doing on site.
So can I stop you there and ask you, what tool would you use to do that?
To be honest, for the transport, I mean, there's a lot of different figures around. It's a pretty simple times in 2 numbers together. But I guess if it's more on the transport point of view, it's there's clearly better. Hybrid and electric is a pretty straightforward switch. But I mean, once they get to site, I think that's where they probably have an even bigger impact. Is if they can actually record what the activities they're doing, the tools, the materials they're using, looking at alternatives.
Mervyn.
Well, I was just going to say there are a couple of platforms that have just come onto the market. There's actually something called the Future Net Zero Standard, which is a platform. A chap called James Napier at Carbon Experts has been working with Energy Live News as a platform, and they've developed a very SME user-friendly platform. So you go in and do a self-assessment, basically a self-certification of your processes, what you're doing, your journeys, your transport. It's low cost, it's quick, relatively easy to do, but I think creating that baseline is a hard job for an SME, certainly a micro SME of that size, because the reality is you won't have the in-house expertise. So having a platform, I mean, the marvelous thing with technology, of course, is that the platforms have come along now. There's so many platforms that you can start to use. Yeah, I mean, Future Net Zero Standards looking to, I think, generate 10,000 SMEs in the first 12 months of its operation. That's a positive step forward. There's limited, I mean, certainly working from home, David's clearly throwing the market. Yeah, it's caused a lot of confusion, because people, instead of using your carbon in one place, you're potentially doing it in another place. On the energy side, the transport, yes, I think the days of jet setting and flying, big discussion about trade shows, and I'm conscious of time, big discussion about trade shows. Ironically, in the energy sector space, we were all having discussions about why do we want the physical trade shows, because encouraging people to fly, drive and travel to trade shows is by definition not very good if you're trying to save your carbon on your journeys. So that's a relevant point.
It's good for the irony coefficient, though. I'm afraid we're going to have to call it there, gents. We've got quite a lot of questions we haven't answered, and as always, we will put those onto the BESA pages on LinkedIn, and we will we'll answer them there, if you may. And what I'm going to ask you guys to do is to give us some recommendations for starting packages, such as the Future Net Zero Standard, Mervyn. The most difficult thing as an SME is, where do I start? And if you can't work out where you're going to start, you put the start off. Thank you all very much, Mervyn, Conor and Ian. That's been really helpful. We'll continue the discussion on LinkedIn, but yes, thank you very much.
No problem, happy to do it.
Excellent.
Great. So coming up, Friday the 31st, we're back lending our platform to SHEP, lift managers and duty holders. And after we did the big one on welding that had 950, we can't wait for that to happen. But with Nick Mellor, good friend Nick Mellor from Leia, who is our equivalent in the lift industry. Hey, you got to Friday. I hope you're going to be wearing a nice tropical shirt for the whole of the weekend. Enjoy a beer or a glass of wine later in the garden. Congratulations on getting to Friday. Thank you for coming today, and we will see you all next week. Good afternoon.
Thanks a lot.